Hey animators, do you want to know the best way to work faster? Slow down. Hey kids, welcome to the Stylish Rebel Chat Time thing. I don't have a thing ready to show you or figured out. I don't have a lesson plan. So it's just going to be a chat time thing while I work on these feet for our character rig. But because I'm doing it at the same time and I'm not great at talking and rigging at the same time, I might just be doodling or showing you things with the character rig as we go. So nothing to see really. But what I want to talk about is ways you can work faster by slowing down a little bit and taking the time to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row and you're not coming out with these sloppy trash revisions because you're not paying attention. This is a big problem in television animation in particular because it's such a fast-paced environment. In something like a Pixar studio, an animator might only have to do 2 or 3 seconds a week. In a television studio, you're looking more at, for like a high-end, super fancy show, you might only have 30 seconds to do, but more often it's towards 40, 50 seconds or even more. I've done up to 70 seconds in a week for a television show. So because you're going so fast, and then you have, while you're animating your scenes, you've got revisions coming in on previous episodes and stuff, it can be a really stressful environment if you're not organized and you don't have things under control, basically. So if you want to just like ease your stress level and have better animation overall, what you got to do is turn off your podcast or your music or your videos, which you definitely should not have videos on. And don't be one of those people now who are like, oh, I actually work better when I'm watching a movie, because you don't. You're not actually working better. You're just alleviating your boredom because you don't know how to do one thing. You need to do 15 things at one time to feel like you're satisfying your brain. And you don't have enough brain left over to see all the nitpicky mistakes that you're making in the run of day. So if you're the type of person who's watching movies and you think that's cool, and then you get revisions like your leveling is bad, if you get layering issues, if you get calls on eye direction, if you get calls on sloppy joints, so if you've got this character here, there's one leg presently, so if you get a call like this, where your elbow looks like that, then turn off what you're watching, because you're not working. This, you should never ever get this as a revision, because there's no skill. It's not, you haven't developed the skill yet to use your eyes and see that this looks hideous. It's that you're not paying attention. So many of the revisions are this. They're just, this is ugly, fix it. Or I'll have something like this, where the glasses is in front of the ear. Just stupid stuff like that. And this should never be a problem. Okay, so if you're an animator, you get, at the beginning of the week, say, you get a sequence of however many scenes you're supposed to be doing in that period of time. Usually it's a week or a 2-week period. What you gotta do is turn off whatever it is that you're distracting yourself with, just for a while. Sometimes it's okay. I listen to music often while I work, but if it's something where I need to use my brain, I just turn it off. And then once I do the brain part, once that's ready, then I can turn my music back on and say I'm doing my in-betweening. You know, I can get away with listening to a podcast or something while I'm in-betweening. But if I'm doing my like big keys, or if I'm doing a really complex rig or something, I'll turn it off for a few minutes, or I'll put on something with no words. It's just like some quiet instrumental music just to block out the studio sounds. And you just gotta focus on the hard part. Trust me, it will change the lives of everybody in animation if everyone does this. So you get your sequence, and you gotta have a pre-animation ritual. Like, create whatever way works best for you, but you wanna watch your entire sequence, and you also wanna look at the sequence before yours and the sequence after, minimum. Best, ideally, you watch the entire episode, and often studios will have you watch the whole episode first, and then you'll get your sequence. But then once you have that sequence, get the storyboards or the Leica and watch the stuff before your scene and watch the stuff after your scene. Because maybe the board artist has put the character this way, but in the scene before yours, he's facing this way. So you actually need to put a turn in there. It's just not super clear in the boards. Ideally, in the studio, the storyboard is where they work out those continuity problems, but it's not always 100%. It's not always super tight. So you have to check that, and that'll save you revisions on continuity between the sequence before yours and the beginning of yours. And then as well, you can see if you need to do something special with your character to make sure it hooks up to the next sequence. So check the board, watch sequence before, your sequence, and the sequence after. Take any notes you need to make sure that that works out. Next, you want to take a look at what your characters are doing in the scenes. You want to make sure that if the characters are supposed to be wearing fancy clothes, some sort of a special hat or a different outfit, you make sure you've got the rigs for that. Because lots of times on a number of different shows, we've had characters that are supposed to be in a new costume, but for whatever reason, scene setup, put in the original costume. Maybe it wasn't even ready yet and they just needed something for scale. Who knows? But you want to double check that your characters are not wearing any weird costumes. Double check if you have all your props that you need. If there are any really crazy poses, you can check and see if there's reuse for that. You can check and see if it's a special pose. Often, if it's a really complex pose, something that's got lots of foreshortening, then many studios will have that designed separately. So you might actually have a special rig for that one scene. So you want to see if there's anything that hasn't been put in your sequence that you need, or if anything's been incorrectly put in your sequence. You're like double checking scene setup, because mistakes happen, but you don't want to make your mistake much harder than it needs to be. Because if this guy's supposed to be wearing a tuxedo and you animate the whole sequence and then there's the costume change, you're going to have to reanimate your whole scene, which is much harder than just going and finding the right costume. Okay, so just check that stuff. You also want to check the boards and make sure there's no special director's notes. So often there's an organization for all your scenes and stuff that everybody uses, uploading and downloading or whatever. You want to see if there's any notes there that have been left from the director, because sometimes they're like, oh, even though it's in the boards like this, do we want it like that? Or the boards are not as exaggerated as we want, or something like that. So if you know about that beforehand, you're not going to get that changed later, and you don't want to do anything twice that you don't have to. You also want to make sure that the dialogue is obviously belong to each character. Sometimes characters might have similar voices, or they're actually voiced by the same person. So if there's ever a voice that you're not 100% sure who it belongs to, you want to double check that as well. Often it's in the storyboard notes. So if you usually have access to the storyboard and you can go peek at those, or you can ask your animation supervisor if you're confused. Get revisions that it's just like the wrong character's talking. And you got to open that scene then and fix something that could have been fixed just by checking if you aren't sure. So once you're sure you know which characters are being animated, what they're supposed to be doing, and who's saying what, stuff like that, once you're 100% sure, then you can go ahead and start animating your scenes. But don't do it before then. Don't guess. And don't say, if it's wrong, someone will tell me. If you're not sure, ask. No one's going to be mad at you for asking who's talking if you don't know. I promise. They're just not going to do that. Or if you have a complex character situation where two characters are doing something, just ask. If you don't know how to rig that, you need a character to give another character a piggyback ride, you don't know how to rig that, ask someone for help. They don't mind. It's okay to ask if you don't know. Ooh, the worst. I was the lead rigger on a show, and I could overhear two of the junior animators behind me trying to figure out how to solve a problem that I clearly knew the answer to. And they were like looking up the help menus, and they were like, well, maybe if we do this, or maybe if we do that. And finally I had to just go over and just be like, guys, you just need this one module, plug it in like that, and you're on your way. Just ask someone who knows what to do. Don't ask the new kid next to you, and then don't do that. Just ask someone who knows. Okay, so that's your pre-animation ritual. Then you can move on to actually animating your scene. Do what you gotta do. Animate your scene to the best of your ability, what you think is really great for the style of the show. Once you think you got your scene animated done well, or a few little scenes, then what you do is you render out a play blast, or like a preview if you're not familiar with what a play blast is. You preview out your scene, and then you go for a little walk, go take a pee, get a little bit of coffee, have a Timbit or something, and then when you come back, watch your scene. Just watch it. And I want you to look for stupid stuff. I want you to make sure if this little arm is above like this, look for that. I want you to make sure this leg is there. Crazier things have happened than having no leg in a studio. Or this leg would be over the top. We'd have this. Don't ever send that to your animation supervisor. What kind of... That's not a skill problem. That's an eyeball problem. That's you not looking at your scene. So you gotta look at your scene, you guys. Because this is not a... If you're getting revisions like this consistently, every now and then you're gonna get one. It's a fast-paced job, and people understand that sometimes you just need a fresh pair of eyes on something. But if you get your sequence, if every single week you're getting this type of revision, it's your fault that you're not looking at your scene after you animate it. Every now and then you get one like this, you go, oh geez, I probably didn't turn off my podcast. But if this is a consistent problem for you, you have to make a checklist. Literally, like, write these things down and like tape them to your desk. Just tape a little checklist. When you're done your scene, check your eye direction. So if this guy's here and you have character 2, just like, yeah, we're having so much fun today. And this guy's looking this way, and this guy's looking that way. Don't do that. Just don't do that, guys. Okay, so eye direction. Write it on your little list. Tape it to your desk. Check it. Joints. This elbow should look like that. It should not look like that. That's wrong. And you can just watch, look at your elbows. If you consistently get the same type of revision, say it's elbows, then you have to write that on your checklist. Be like, check those elbows because I've been told 3 times this month that my elbows are bad. And that's too many times because you're just going to make your animation supervisor drink themselves into an early grave because your elbows are so bad. Just don't do that, you guys. So check your joints, because with cutout, that's a big part of cutout, is making sure that these joints are looking good. If this character's shrugging like that, that should not look like that. This rig does have shoulders built in so that the shoulders can come up like that. And I even put in deformer shoulders so that you can get a real clean line here. So we're not gonna have shoulder looks like that. We're not, are we, guys? Nope, we're not gonna do that. We want a nice clean line here. We want this clean down here. If these need to be tapered, you're writing it on your checklist. Be like, oh, they like tapered lines here. If they like pointy elbows, you got that on your checklist. Are my elbows pointy? Checklist. Love a checklist. So all those things, eye direction, joints, specialty stylized things. If they like pointy elbows, if they like the highlights of the eyes to always be in the upper right hand corner, put it on your checklist. Don't get consistent revisions on dumb highlight stuff. Don't do it. Just put it on your checklist. Like, write it on your checklist. You also want to check, let me just fix that because that's bugging me. You also want to check perspective problems. So if you've got an arm like this and a sleeve like that, that's just wrong. It just is wrong. The perspective is bad. So check your perspective stuff. So in some shows, you're not going to deal a lot with that, but a lot of shows now are getting into more detail, and they're trying to make their stuff more three-dimensional. So they're going to want you to go in and just do some drawing substitutions here on this sleeve here and make sure that we're getting the three-dimensional circle. And you may or may not need a back on this. It really depends on the show, but it at least needs to be wrapping around the arm in the correct way, so that it looks like it's coming forward. So check your perspective. That's a thing too. Make sure all of the characters in the scene are animated. This is actually a problem. Make sure all of the characters are visible, because one thing, if you definitely go and check out my display video if you don't know how to use displays. Sometimes people will deactivate, so say they'll deactivate this guy. I know he's part of the hair because I just drew it in there, but they'll deactivate him because it's lagging down the scene, and then they'll animate this guy, and then they'll forget to turn him back on. They'll just leave him off. So if you do deactivate instead of using displays, write it on your checklist. It's such a good practice that is so underutilized and underrated, to just have a little checklist. And I do this in special effects. There's usually only 1 or 2 people in the department. So I'm the only person right now. I'm the entire effects department. So once the scenes are done, I have to watch all my scenes again and then give myself revisions. I have to double check and that nothing's looking sloppy. Things aren't staggering, because if something's done on 2s and my stuff's done on 1, sometimes it's staggery. So all of this stuff, once you get up into like a supervisor position, that you have to give yourself those revisions. So start as early as possible. If you're brand new to the studio and you have a checklist and you are taking care of these little elbows and you're taking care of these perspective problems, you never send a scene in with characters deactivated. Your characters are always wearing the right outfits. If you're getting a pile of revisions every week, but it's needs more energy, or the fall should happen sooner, or the character should be a little more sluggish, stuff like that, you're doing wonderful, okay? You're doing so good as a junior if you're getting those revisions. If you're getting revisions that are of just simple technical stuff, simple joints and layering these feet, stuff like that, that's just sloppy animation. That's not a skill level problem. That's an attention level problem. So even if you are just going to ignore the stuff about not watching movies while you work, at least when you start your scenes and at the beginning of the day, spend a few minutes with nothing to distract you and make a checklist. Double check that you know what you're doing that day, you know exactly what needs to happen, you know what happens before and after. And when you're finished your scenes, just turn off whatever it is that you've been listening to, close your damn Facebook, and go through and double check for these little minor mistakes, because that's 80% of the revisions that happen are just things that people aren't paying attention. They didn't slow down and just make sure that this little thing here is working. These little checklist items or little style items, like having the highlight in a specific place. Certain shows do get detail-y like that. And if that's the case, you want to write it down, put it on a Post-it note, stick it to your monitor. And then when you're done your scene, you think you're done. If you make that checklist, I'm going to say the word checklist, like 50 more times checklist, make it. And if you go over it every time you finish a scene and every time you start a sequence, you're good. You're going to have fewer revisions. You're going to have more time for your next sequence, and your supervisor's going to love you because you're not going to be a consistent nitpicky problem for them to solve. And if you're independent, just having a checklist where you double check this stuff is going to do you great too, because your animation is going to be tighter and it's going to look nicer, and you're going to have a better product for wherever you put it, YouTube or festivals. All of this stuff is something that you should really take care to keep track of. You'll get better eyes for these things just by being aware of them. Okay, so that's it for this week. Please leave a comment if you love or hate this, and how mad, sad, glad are you that I just didn't do anything in the background except like yell at you and occasionally draw bad drawing. It's been a week, you guys. I'll have something more educational for you soon. Okay, so like, share, subscribe, all those internet things the internet people ask you to do. And I will see you in the next video.